Back on the Morgan Streetman Show. Morgan, we've got to go around the world to keep up with all the global news that we need to cover here on the Morgan Streetman Show. And while we feel a lot of strife in our country, we talk about that, a lot of infighting, it's really happening now in France.
You see a lot of this all around the world. People are waking up, it seems like, to some of these problems. This neo-Marxist or Marxist-Leninist agenda that's taking place, and the connections between some of that and Islamism all around the world. Now, we've told you for years on this show, we've really covered this story in depth, and that is all of the folks migrating into Europe who are establishing their own little enclaves there. We used to call those ghettos, but these are not forced establishments that everybody's got to go into the same area, but they simply do go into the same area, and they're actually becoming in Europe what's called no-go zones, which means that the police can't go in there. Well, in France, we've recently had a couple of letters signed. There was one signed on April 21st. Now, these are sort of letters to the general public at large, so they're written, from a political ideology perspective. But on April 21st, thousands of French servicemen and women, including about 20 retired generals, signed a letter warning political leaders that the country was heading for a civil war. Well, this brought a bit of a backlash from some of the other military leaders, and then that resulted in another letter being sent now after that, which now includes up to 1 million signatures, including thousands upon thousands of apparently active duty French soldiers and sailors and other members of the armed forces in France. Now, this other letter says, and I'm going to read you some quotes from it. It's directed, Mr. President, dear ministers, congressmen, and generals. And then they talk about one of the stanzas that's rarely sung in their national anthem. This is a very nationalistic letter that they wrote, but they say, and I'm quoting now, many of us have faced enemy fire in Afghanistan, Mali, Central America, or elsewhere. Some have lost their brothers in arms. They offered their blood to destroy the very Islamism you make concessions to on our own soil. We've seen with our own eyes our country's abandoned areas where criminality has been accepted. We've seen some religious communities try to portray us as the enemy. France means nothing to them. At best, an object of ridicule. At worst, something to be despised and hated. We've seen this situation in countries in crisis. It precedes a country's collapse. It announces chaos and violence. And while you've been affirming there's a danger of a military coup, the truth is that violence and chaos will come as a civil insurrection. Yes, if civil war breaks out, the military will maintain law and order on our soil because we will be asked to carry out that task. It is the very definition of a civil war. No one wants this terrible outcome, neither our elders nor us, but the truth is that civil war is brewing in France, and you know it perfectly well. Of course, there's a lot more to that letter than what I just read to you, but that'll give you a little flavor for it. Now, these are a number of active duty as well as retired servicemen and women in France. And interestingly, just like what you see in America, over in France, the Minister of Defense and head of the French Army has announced that they will be sanctioning anyone that they discover is an active duty soldier, and signed on to that letter, which over 1 million people in France have signed on to. So just like what happens here, they'll be punishing anybody that they find that dares to say such things, that dares to speak the truth. In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. Isn't that true?
That's what you always
That's
say
what I always say. So, this is like the week for writing letters and for people in the military getting in trouble. We got 2 more stories on that. We got an open letter that was released from the Flag Officers for America. That means 1 star and up across all service branches. And that open letter, I'd recommend that you go out there and get it. It lists a number of problems, including this neo-Marxist movement tied in with the BLM, the racial politics, the divide and conquer that's described, that Murdoch talked about, and we've talked about so many times on this show. But I just want to read you the opening part of this letter, which, by the way, is signed by over 120 retired generals, admirals, and you've got all ranks. You've even got an actual admiral, the highest rank, well, not the very highest, but the highest flag officer rank for the Navy. You've got rear admirals, lieutenant generals, major generals, brigadier generals, vice admirals, again, 120 retired U.S. military flag officers, 120 plus, have signed this. And let me just read you the first paragraph, and I think you'll hear some parallels to the letter that was written by the French military officers and soldiers and service people. And this says, quote, "Our nation is in deep peril. We're in a fight for our survival as a constitutional republic like no other time since our founding in 1776. The conflict is between supporters of socialism and Marxism versus supporters of constitutional freedom and liberty."
That is frightening.
It is frightening, but how many people will actually call this out, call it what it is? This is a communist takeover we're witnessing in our country. They're trying to upend and destroy all of our institutions and our culture and replace it with this culture that's never worked, this political ideology that's never worked in the history of the world.
It's always been that way. You know, you see those in the entertainment industry and you see those in universities lean that way. And now you know who else seems to be or is on board like they've never been in droves is corporate America.
Corporate America, and now we see the leadership of our military. We got the same thing happening in our military. You know, there was actually an officer that was just relieved of his command. His name is Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Lohmeyer, and he was the commander of the 11th Space Warning Squadron, so he was part of the Space Force in the U.S. military. This is out at Buckley Air Force Base in Colorado, and basically he's recently released a book called Irresistible Revolution, Marxism's Goal of Conquest and the Unmaking of the American Military. Now, he ran this book by his military superiors prior to releasing it. By the way, it's sold out. You can't get a copy of this book now because of this news story. But he ran this by his superiors. He was permitted to publish it. The purpose of the book is to explore what he calls the impact of a neo-Marxist agenda and the manner in which the Black Lives Matter movement, anti-racism, postmodernism, and political correctness are affecting the national security of the United States and are affecting the U.S. military. That's what the book's about. He ran it by the people that he was supposed to run it by prior to publication, was given permission to publish it, and then he went on a podcast, and he said things basically echoing what he said in the book. Which essentially is that this agenda, this BLM race politics agenda that they're trying to put in place, which is based on Marxist-Leninist principles, this agenda is dividing us and it will not unify us. That's what he said.
You know, what's interesting what he said is it's intended to be divisive, yet we spread it as if it's going to unify.
Yeah, exactly. It's the perfect subterfuge because the name anti-racism actually brings in policies of racism. It brings all we can talk about is race. It's supposed to be anti-race. You know, you're supposed to be judged by the content of your character, not the color of your skin. Now every lead is the color of your skin first.
Is this a new Trojan horse?
Of course it is. This is a Trojan horse. That's what he's pointing out. This is going to destroy the unity of the military, where unity and everybody being on the same page and being apolitical. Remember, the military's always been apolitical. You're not supposed to be political in the military. Now the entire military is being co-opted to purvey a political ideology to the soldiers. And if you don't agree with this, you're going to be removed from your command, and you might even be washed out of the military altogether. So this gentleman has been relieved of his command. The general that relieved him of command says he's lost faith in this lieutenant colonel's ability to lead. And like the rest of people that speak up against this Marxist-Leninist ideology, that speak up against this Trojan horse that's being put into all areas of our society, he's going to be silenced. And just like Stalin would say, no man, no problem. Just airbrush Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Lohmeyer right out of the picture. Airbrush him right out of history, right down the memory hole. like you never even existed. No man, no problem. And we see the Marxism and the Leninism continue to play out. You need to wake up to this. If you don't think that this is what's going on, you need to educate yourself and wake up to this because it's spreading. This is getting worse. It's not just, like you said, it's not just in our universities anymore. It's now in our military. It's the predominant ideology of the leadership of our military. And just like it's destroyed our other institutions and public faith and public unity in our other institutions, it's going to do the same to our military. And don't think that's not part of the plan. That's the point. Destabilizing and destroying all of the institutions that could stand up to a communist revolution. That's the point. And that's exactly what they're doing. And we're seeing it play out right in front of our faces. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard. And if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.